Why do the most spiritually awakened people struggle the most with love? If you've felt this, know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. There is a curious paradox in this question, something that defies everything society has taught us about relationships, connection, and intimacy. While the world says you need to try harder, strive more, improve your strategy, the spiritual truth reveals exactly the opposite. And if you felt that the more you grow internally, the more difficult it becomes to find someone you can truly connect with, you are not alone. You are not broken. In fact, you are experiencing one of the deepest truths about awakened consciousness and authentic love. Today, you will discover why the very illumination that should bring deeper connection seems to create exactly the opposite, and why this is not a defect, but a door to something far more real. Let's start with what society tells us about love. From an early age, we are conditioned with a very specific narrative. Love, we're told, requires effort, strategy, control. You need to present yourself the right way, say the right things, play the right game. There is an entire industry built around this premise. Books on how to win someone, seduction tactics, formulas for keeping interest, as if love were a fortress to be invaded, a prize conquered through the correct techniques. This is the Western approach to love. Treat it as acquisition, as something you make happen through force of will and calculated manipulation. But here is the first shock of contrast. This entire narrative is built on a fundamental illusion. Love is not something you acquire. Love is energy that flows freely when there is authenticity, openness, and truth. And it is exactly here that spiritual awakening creates its first painful dilemma. Imagine Sarah, a 34-year-old therapist from Seattle, who spent the last 5 years on a deep journey of self-discovery. She meditated, she went to therapy, she read Eastern philosophy, she immersed herself in contemplative practices, and something changed fundamentally within her. She can no longer wear social masks like she used to. She can no longer pretend interest in superficial conversations. She can no longer manipulate romantic situations through strategic games. Why? Because awakened consciousness cannot lie, cannot pretend, cannot force. This is the double-edged sword of awakening. The more you see the truth about yourself and the nature of existence, the less you can participate in collective illusions, including the illusion that love is something you conquer through performance. Sarah is on dates where the men are still playing the old game, creating personas, telling calculated stories, using attraction techniques. She can see through all of this with painful clarity. But the problem isn't just her awareness, it's that she can no longer play along. Her consciousness simply refuses. And here we arrive at the core of the paradox. The most spiritually awakened people cannot force love precisely because they are awake. Let's go deeper. Philosopher Alan Watts spent decades exploring this territory. He observed something profound about the nature of consciousness and authenticity. The more you try to grasp something, the more it slips away. The more you try to control love, the more it dissolves. The more you try to force yourself to be authentic, the more inauthentic you become. It's like trying to grab water with closed hands. The tighter you grasp, the faster it slips away. Watts called this the law of reverse effort. The effort to achieve certain states is exactly what prevents them. Trying to sleep, you stay awake. Trying to relax, you become tense. Trying to be spontaneous, you become calculating. And trying to force authentic love through techniques and strategies, you create exactly the opposite. You create performance, theater, illusion. But modern Western culture is obsessed with performance, with doing, with controlling, with forcing results through directed effort. This is the mentality of the ego. It needs to be in control, needs to manipulate variables, needs to guarantee results. And when someone awakens spiritually, something in their consciousness transcends this need for control. not because they decided to transcend it, but because they saw that control is an illusion, that the ego is a construction, that authenticity cannot be manufactured. Let's return to Sarah. She is on another date. The man in front of her is charming, successful, says all the right things, but she feels something viscerally wrong, not because he is a bad person, but because everything is performance, everything calculated, everything ego trying to impress ego. And her consciousness simply cannot connect with this. It's like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. It doesn't work, not because she doesn't want it to. It doesn't work because her consciousness has evolved to a place where performance does not register as real connection. This is the specific loneliness of the awakened soul. Not the absence of people, but the absence of authentic resonance. You can be surrounded by people yet feel completely alone because no one is operating at the same level of consciousness. No one is being real. Everyone is playing roles, wearing masks, pursuing validation, and you can no longer play that game. Not because you think you're better, but because you literally cannot. Your consciousness has evolved beyond this. Here is where the contrast becomes painful. Society says, if you are alone, you need to try harder. You need to improve your strategy. You need to become more attractive. You need to play the game better. But the spiritual truth says, if you are alone as an awakened soul, you are experiencing the cost of truth. You've seen through the illusions, and there's no way to unsee them. Watts observed that awakened people experience what he called sacred solitude. Not solitude as absence or emptiness, but as clarity, as freedom, as a refusal to participate in games of inauthenticity. Sarah doesn't hate people. She simply can no longer connect through falsehood. The usual way of connecting has stopped making sense, and this creates a paradoxical cycle. The more authentic she becomes, the more vulnerable she gets. The more vulnerable she becomes, the more she opens up. The more she opens up, the more she encounters people still protected by masks. And the incompatibility is painful, so she withdraws. But the withdrawal is not a return to unconsciousness. It's a deeper movement into authenticity. It's a cycle that deepens. Authenticity leads to vulnerability. Vulnerability leads to rejection by those still asleep. Rejection leads to even deeper authenticity. And with each turn of this cycle, something interesting happens. The need for external approval diminishes. The need for social validation weakens. The dependence on others to affirm your place in the world dissolves. Not because Sarah became cold, but because she no longer needs others to tell her who she is. She knows who she is. She saw through the illusion that identity comes from outside. This is the final paradox of awakening and love. Awakened souls cannot force connection because they've seen that true connection cannot be forced. They cannot manipulate love because they understand that manipulated love is not love. They cannot play romantic games because they've transcended the need to win, and this leaves them in strange territory. Territory that most people avoid. The territory of total authenticity without guarantees, of vulnerability without strategy, of openness without control. Society fears this territory because this territory demands the death of the ego. It demands letting go of the illusion of control. It demands trusting something greater than personal strategy. So most people keep playing the old games, using the old techniques, pursuing love as acquisition, as conquest, as the result of calculated effort, and awakened people watch this with compassion and sadness, because they remember when they did the same. They remember the exhaustion. They remember the falsehood. They remember the emptiness of connections built on performance. You always did your best. With the consciousness you had at each moment, you navigated the world the only way you knew how. But here is the question that creates the final tension. So are awakened souls condemned to solitude? Are they fated to wander the world never finding true resonance? Is the cost of truth permanent abandonment of true love? No, Absolutely not, because here is what society doesn't tell you about this paradox, and this is where everything changes. The same thing that makes awakened souls incapable of forcing love is precisely what makes them capable of experiencing it in its truest form. Let me explain. And this truest form of love begins with a principle that Alan Watts taught with mastery. You don't need to seek love. You need to stop blocking its flow. Imagine a river. Not a river that forces itself, pushing stones or struggling through the earth, but a river that simply flows, that moves naturally following the course of its own nature, that goes around obstacles without resistance, that finds its way not because it's trying, but because that's what rivers do. You are that river. Love is not something you pursue. Love is something that already flows through you. It always has flowed. The problem was never the absence of love. The problem was that you built dams. You erected walls. You blocked the natural course of your own essence. And these dams, they have names. The first is called I need to be different. The second is I need to fix myself. The third, perhaps the heaviest of all, is I am not enough as I am. Each of these beliefs functions as a giant stone in the middle of your river. And the more you try to force love to flow around these stones, the more you exhaust yourself, the more you struggle, the more you wonder why love seems so distant, when in reality it has always been there, waiting for you to simply remove the dams. Alan Watts spent decades exploring this paradox, and what he discovered was simple yet profound. You don't attract love by transforming yourself into something you're not. You attract love by becoming completely who you already are. Think about it. Every time you wore a mask to be accepted, every time you hid parts of yourself for fear of rejection, you weren't moving closer to love. You were creating a fictional version of yourself. And when someone fell in love with that version, you felt a strange emptiness because it wasn't you being loved. It was the mask, the real you, the one you consider imperfect, insufficient, inadequate. That is the you that is capable of real love, not the polished version you present to the world, not the character you built to please, but the raw, vulnerable, authentic essence that exists beneath all these layers. And here is the insight that changes everything. This essence does not need fixing. It never did. Watts used to say that consciousness is like water. It takes the shape of the container, but its nature remains unchanged. You can try to force it, mold it, control it, but in the end, water always returns to its natural state. Fluid, free, effortless, and you are like that. Your essential nature is loving, not because you strive to be, but because that is what you are, beneath all attempts at control. The problem then was never you. It was the ego, that voice inside your head that insists you are not enough, that you need to be smarter, more attractive, more successful, more interesting, that you need to win love through performance. But the ego lies. The ego creates the illusion of separation. It makes you believe you are alone, that you need to prove your worth, that love is something scarce that must be conquered through strategy and effort. And the more you believe this story, the more you distance yourself from the simple truth. You are already whole. You are already enough. You are already worthy of love. And when you finally understand this, when you truly internalize this truth, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing. You stop forcing. You stop molding yourself into diluted versions of yourself. And in this stopping, in this surrender to what you really are, you become magnetic. Not because you are doing something special, but because you stop doing the wrong things. Think of a flower. It doesn't try to bloom. It doesn't strive to be beautiful. It simply is. And in that being, it attracts bees, butterflies, even human beings stop to admire it. Not because it is performing, but because it is being completely itself. You are that flower, and when you live from that wholeness, when you no longer need someone to fill a void within you, you attract a different kind of connection. Not someone who comes to complete you, but someone who recognizes that you are already whole. Someone who has also arrived at this same truth within themselves. Alan Watts referred to this as the resonance of awakened souls. It is not attraction born from need. It is recognition rooted in essence. It is when two beings who are already whole meet not to fill gaps, but to share fullness. And that is the true irony, isn't it? You spend years searching for love because you feel something is missing. You try strategy after strategy, read books, watch videos, strive tirelessly. And all the while, what you were searching for was already inside you. Love doesn't need to be found. It needs to be revealed. And it is revealed in the moment you stop blocking its natural flow. In the moment you remove the stones from the river. In the moment you release the need to be anything other than what you already are. This is not passivity. This is not giving up. It is the exact opposite. It is the deepest courage possible. The courage to be authentically you, even when the entire world says you should be someone else. And that courage, that radical authenticity, it is irresistibly attractive. Because in a world full of masks, performances, and fabricated versions, someone who is genuinely real cannot help but stand out. Not because they are trying to, but because they simply are. So when you understand this, when you truly comprehend that love is not something you conquer, but something you already are, the question changes completely. It is no longer, how do I find love? It is, how do I remove what is blocking the love that already exists in me? It is no longer, why doesn't anyone love me? It is, how can I love myself so completely that I don't need validation from anyone else? And here is the final paradox. The insight that Alan Watts wanted everyone to understand. When you no longer need love, you become the kind of person that love naturally flows toward. Not because you are manipulating or strategizing, but because you are living from a place of fullness. And fullness attracts. It always has. It always will. That is why forcing never worked. Because you were already whole. You just didn't know it. But now comes the practical question. Understanding this intellectually is one thing. Agreeing with these words, nodding your head, feeling that moment of clarity, that is easy. But living it? Really embodying this truth in your daily life, in your relationships, in your moments of solitude, when doubt whispers in the middle of the night. That is where true transformation happens. And Watts showed us exactly how to do it. And this is where the journey becomes visceral. This is where philosophy leaves the realm of ideas and enters the body, the everyday, the way you move through the world each moment. Understanding that love cannot be forced is one thing. Living that truth is something completely different. So what does it actually look like to live without forcing love? How does this consciousness manifest in both the small and the big decisions of life? Imagine a date, not a date laden with secret expectations, not a dinner where every word is carefully measured to impress, but a date where you are simply present. You are not trying to fill the empty space you feel within. You are not assessing whether this person can finally complete you. You are there whole, overflowing with yourself, and the connection happens or it doesn't, and both outcomes are equally valid. This is the visceral difference. The awakened soul doesn't go to a meeting seeking salvation. It goes offering presence. There's no hidden agenda. There's no disguised need for validation. There are just two beings sharing a moment without the invisible pressure of lack. Contrast this with the old pattern. The sleeping person, still trapped in the belief that they are incomplete, approaches every romantic interaction like an audition. Every gesture is calculated. Every silence is tense. The fear of rejection permeates everything, because rejection doesn't just mean this person isn't compatible with me. It means I am not enough, and that distorted meaning transforms every encounter into an emotional minefield. But when you live from wholeness, the encounter transforms. There's nothing more to prove. There's no void to fill desperately. You're no longer performing to be chosen. You're simply being yourself and allowing the other person to be themselves. And in that absence of force, in that absence of agenda, something miraculous can emerge. Authentic connection. This is the cyclical pattern completing itself. Fullness in every interaction. Not because you finally found the right person, but because you finally became the whole person. And here is the insight that changes everything. It's the secret that all the previous words were preparing you to receive. It's the revelation that dissolves every paradox we explored, every contradiction we highlighted. When you stop seeking love, you discover that you are love. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The energy you were chasing out there in other people, in external validations, in promises of wholeness, was always flowing through you. You don't need to find love. You need to recognize that you are its source. This is the death of the seeker. This is liberation from need. This is the moment when the river realizes it isn't flowing toward the ocean. It is the ocean's expression in movement. Think about it. Really absorb this. Your whole life, you were taught that love is something you get from another person. Something you deserve if you're good enough, attractive enough, interesting enough. Something that needs to be conquered, maintained, protected. You were conditioned to believe that without external love, you are in deficit. But what if that is the fundamental illusion? What if love is not a commodity to be exchanged, but a frequency to be embodied? What if the reason forcing love doesn't work isn't because you're doing it wrong, but because you're looking in the wrong place? You are love. This isn't superficial self-help. It's existential truth. Every cell of your body was formed by processes that are, in essence, love manifested. Energy organizing itself into form. Consciousness expressing itself through matter. You are the universe experiencing itself through a unique perspective. And when you stop seeking that externally, when you stop trying to extract validation from external connections, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel what was always there. The fullness, the peace, the sense that you already are what you were looking for. This is complete transformation. No more exhaustion from effort, just the serenity of surrender. And this transformation reframes everything, including loneliness, especially loneliness. Because loneliness for the awakened soul isn't punishment. It isn't evidence of failure. It isn't an emptiness to be filled as quickly as possible. Loneliness is alignment. It's communion with your true self. It's the sacred space where you stop performing for others and finally find yourself. The river metaphor returns here, completing the cycle. The river flows alone, but never lonely. It doesn't need another river to validate its flow. It doesn't question whether it should be flowing. It simply is. And in that being, it nourishes everything around it. It sustains life. It shapes landscapes. It eventually meets other rivers, not from necessity, but from nature. Awakened souls don't force because they don't need to. They trust the flow. They inhabit fullness. And from that fullness, authentic connections emerge naturally and effortlessly, without manipulation or fear. You're not alone because nobody wants you. You're alone because you're aligning with who you really are. And from that alignment, the right kind of connection will come, not because you forced it, but because you became a magnetic field of authenticity. And now, the paradox with which we began finally makes perfect sense. Why can't you force love even when you desperately want to? Because love isn't something you do, it's something you are. And you cannot force your own being. You can only recognize it, accept it, embody it. Philosophy becomes teaching. Teaching becomes lived wisdom. Wisdom transforms into peace. So here is the complete journey. You began in paradox. Why does something as natural as love seem impossible to achieve when you want it most? You pass through understanding. Love doesn't respond to force. It responds to resonance. And now you've arrived at transformation. You don't need to force love because you are love. Your inability to force isn't your weakness. It's your greatest gift. Because that inability is what finally allows you to stop. Stop performing. Stop trying. Stop seeking externally for what was always within. And in that stopping, in that surrender, you discover the truth that awakened souls have always known. Love knows how to find you, but only when you stop running from yourself. Trust your awakening, trust the flow, trust that you are already complete, and that from this wholeness, everything meant for you will come. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. Not because you conquered it, but because you became it. Your spiritual journey and your love journey are not separate, they are the same journey. Because when you finally fall in love with who you are, the universe conspires to reflect that love back to you in ways you could never have imagined. This is the promise fulfilled. From paradox to peace, from exhausting effort to the serenity of surrender, from relentless searching to the discovery that you were never lost. You are already what you seek, and that truth, when truly lived, transforms absolutely everything.